Okay, hello and welcome back. We're up to week 3 of August now, recording from Wednesday to Wednesday. So we're now looking at the 14th of August to the 21st of August. So on our calendar, we've covered Mercury Retrograde enters Leo last week. So we'll just remind you that Mercury Retrograde is now in Leo. And we'll be looking from the 16th, Mars square Saturn, right through this very, very busy 18th and 19th dates. Right up to, that's really it. Everything's happening on the 18th and 19th. But there's a lot happening in those dates.
Yeah, spoiler alert if you did not know that Mercury was going retrograde, because it definitely is.
Yes. Yeah.
This is an overview of the whole month. This is a nice little visualization.
And Peter from
Right.
Astrology does this really great graphic, and that shows us where the planets are going, where they've been for the whole of the month.
Well, I love that Peter does this because it gives you a visualization of just the entire zodiac, the whole zodiac. And so you see where there's movement, where there's an absence of movement. It doesn't show the moon because the moon goes through every single sign within a month. And it doesn't show the sun because the sun is primarily, at least in Leo for this month, it is ingressing into Virgo. But you get to see, okay, well, there's Saturn still over there in Pisces. You see that Pluto right there at that 0 degree of Aquarius moving backwards into Capricorn. You see how quickly Venus is moving. Usually Venus and Mercury, you see those lines kind of comparable and distance, but because Mercury is retrograde, it's kind of going back over. But you see how little the outer planets move and how quickly the inner planets move. So I like just getting that visualization. Where is going to be the swiftest change? Where are things going to be returning? Where are things going to be continue to be kind of slowed down with the retrogrades? It's just a nice visualization of the planetary movements.
But yeah, the other thing I got from this as well is we can very clearly see who's affected. And we see the mutable signs showing up here with the opposition to Saturn, Venus and Mercury traveling from, I'm going to struggle to find my words again, Virgo back to Leo. So here we're going back into the fixed energy of Leo. And we also see Gemini, another mutable sign that's squaring Virgo. So we see this is where all the action's happening, and it's really clear to see it then. When we break it down into this is squaring that, this is squaring that, it's harder to see the full picture. But here we can see this full picture of, okay, there's a lot of action here and there's a focus here. And then we've got
the visualization, the visualization that just came through was, if you look at these almost as like raindrops, this is where water is going to be poured down to kind of feed different parts of your chart. Other parts of your chart are not going to have rain this month, but the others are going to have rain, which is nutrients, and it's life-giving, and it's maybe there's weeds there and those will also grow. But just like when we say focus on an area of a chart, just think of like the energy that you give to certain topics and subjects. The more energy you give it, the more it's going to grow. And so these mutable topics are definitely being fed this month.
Yeah. So if you're not sure what the mutable signs are, we're looking at Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, and also Sagittarius, because that will have the opposition from Gemini and a square from Pisces and Virgo. And then when we're talking about the fixed signs, we're also looking at Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. So those are the signs that are activated there. So if you've got your sun, moon, rising there, but also if you've got any other planets, if you don't know, you can go to astroseek.com and enter your birth data, and it will tell you. I've got a video on my YouTube that shows you how to do that if you don't know, but you can pull up your chart and get a free chart and it will tell you. And then just look for this little sign for Gemini, this little sign for Virgo, and it will tell you what house. And then I've got another video that goes through the house topics, and that's what kind of areas in your life are being activated, what kind of topics you might expect. So that's what.
And if you like the way she does it, you can hire her as an astrologer to read your chart.
Yeah, both Krista and I have our books open, and there'll be links to, and there is on the start and end screens as well, links to us if you want to get more details and information. And the other thing is that not all these transits affect everybody, because it does depend on where your planets are in your chart. So you don't have to think that everything is activating everything in your chart. But certainly if you've got a lot of placements in this, it might feel like it this month. Because like Krista says, it's raining on your chart in these places.
We're going to be looking at some pretty packed in days that are, of course, illuminated by the full moon. But we start with Friday, Saturn square Mars.
Yeah. So we're looking at Gemini through to Pisces, and it's also squaring Venus, co-present with Neptune and Jupiter. So we've got quite a lot of planets in the conversation here. So we talked last week about Jupiter and Mars. This is the first time Saturn's entered the conversation, although it was in that cross configuration with Mars and Jupiter, but now it's really gone exact with Mars. Saturn is a planet, I mean, I think of the archetype of them both, of like focused and disciplined action, because Mars wants to take action. Saturn brings the discipline, the hard work, sets limits and boundaries on us. Hard work and persistence, determined energy, really to get projects complete. And the shadow side can be like an oppressive work regime or inhibited or frustrated energy. If the boundaries are too harsh, you can really collide with them at this kind of time. And we spoke before about how this is a waxing square, like an opening square. And these planets met in conjunction, Mars and Saturn, on the 10th of April. So because we've got all these squares happening, it's very hard to pick out what's affecting you individually. But certainly if you've had anything around those kind of themes, and we'll lean into it a little bit more as we continue with the discussion, but from the 10th of April onwards, they met at 14 degrees then. So if you had things around those themes, and we were talking yesterday about this spiritual teacher who uses punishing methods, and I was using the example of like a dance teacher where it's very beautiful, the results that you get with dance, but sometimes it can be very harsh. You know, if you think of, I'm going to take some water.
Sure. Yeah, like I was a ballerina for about 14 years, and the idea of, you know, especially wearing toe ballet shoes, you know, you were wrapped very, very, very tightly so that your ankles and your whole feet are very supported. And, you know, just the image of toe shoes in ballet for Saturn and Pisces feels very on brand, because it's beautiful. It's in Pisces. It's Saturn. It's being bound. It's being held very, very tightly so that you have the fortitude to perform, to dance. It's very taxing on the body, and it's very beautiful and graceful to be able to have the control to express in a way that you can't unless you have that discipline. And so Saturn just can bring limitations just for the sake of limitations, not even for the mission of creating discipline. I feel like Jupiter kind of does that more, to create kind of an order of things, but Saturn will do that. The byproduct of Saturn is that it lasts usually for a lot longer than other transits. Its own synodic cycle is very long, but it's experienced with repetition for most of our lives. You know, we have a Saturn return, you know, every 27-ish years. And so we experience what that means to go through a full Saturn return. But Saturn squaring that Mars, you know, Mars is in an air sign, Saturn is in a water sign. So it's the fusing of those two. It's a square, so it's a nature of Mars. And Mars is faster. You know, Mars doesn't have a lot of dignity in Gemini, but it is within its own bound. Is it in its own decan there too? It is. Yeah, it's right that middle. So I mean, it has its tools available. Saturn over here is barely in Mercury's bound and in Jupiter's decan. Jupiter traditionally rules Pisces, so there is some sense of agency there. But Mars feels kind of like the instigator in the situation, having just been fully empowered by that Jupiter conjunction earlier. It's definitely kind of pushing that fortitude to new heights.
Yeah, I was looking at the Deccan stories, and of course the Saturn one we haven't come across yet in August, And Pisces too, we've got from Kira Ryberg, the astrologer who wrote an ebook on the decans. She gives us the word of contentment. So it's quite a nice placement there in the middle of Pisces. And Austin Coppock talks about the net of bringing together sort of everything that we're bound to in that sense, and wish fulfillment. And the tarot card that relates to it is the Nine of Cups. So that's very much like a completing of emotional things, which we
And
associate.
then Mars comes in to like disrupt that.
Yes, yeah. Mars is saying, no, come on.
You want more than this. Don't be
Yeah.
content.
Yeah, because the decan for Gemini 2 is complexity, hermaphrodite, and embrace contradictions. So that's where Mars is. And that's what he's looking to bring in, like really, I mean, some modern astrologers call, do they call Mars the disruptor?
They should.
Yeah.
Being Mars ruled, I can confirm.
Yeah, because they will cut things out of your life if
Yeah.
it feels they're not working for you. They'll go whether you're ready for that to happen or not. They will go. We often say for good or bad, because you have to judge the dignity and the aspects it's making and everything to see whether that's for the natives good or bad.
Right.
In the chart, and obviously it's harder to see in a mundane chart. We can't give you an idea, but
well, just quickly say you have Gemini rising, and say your ascendant is like early degrees, so you're not being hit on the ascendant, but that Mars Jupiter conjunction, and particularly Mars, is transiting your first house, and Saturn is retrograde and has been retrograde in your 10th house. So what advice would you give to somebody of a mutable rising? Because it's also, you've got Virgo down there in the 4th with Venus, Sagittarius ruling the 7th, having Mars and Jupiter in the 1st, squaring that Saturn up there in the 10th. I mean, to me, that like I would pay attention to that and talk to a client about it.
yeah.
But what's an example? Because there's many examples you can give, but what's an example if you had a client sit in front of you as a Gemini rising? Like, let's give our Gemini risings a little anecdote of what might they expect.
Yeah, because we often call that like a tax upon the 10th, because the 10th is asking for something and the 1st is the one that pays the price. So Mars there would be paying the price of whatever Saturn in the 10th wants. So whatever Saturn is creating, that beautiful thing that Saturn wants to create in Pisces, the Gemini would be to taking the action and paying the price. But like Mars, when you see that in the 1st, sometimes you can relate that to, like I talk about creating a healthy container for Mars, because Mars in the 1st wants to, it can be hot-headed, or it can, it's going to be somebody who's always on the move, and always wanting to create or to take action on something. So it could end up in aggression if that person doesn't have an outlet for all that energy. So you would think of people who are either very sporty. I think of somebody who's sort of running all the time, or at the gym, or boxing, or has some healthy outlet for all that energy. So are we talking about like as a transit, if that's transiting there, but they're Gemini rising and it's transiting, then I would say that there might be something significant happening that's going to affect their 10th house planets, which would be their career, that Saturn's creating something structurally lasting in their career. And this is going to be the time where Jupiter's creating opportunities and Mars is taking action on those opportunities, but certainly not to overlook those opportunities that Jupiter's creating. And that time when Mars and Saturn are talking is when you're really going to see that opening up. And that's the time when you want to be taking action, and that action can be evolving the self, because this 1st house is the house of the self, the planets, the helm, we call it, what you can see.
I could also see, because Mars does require sacrifice. It's like kind of part of its nature. And so maybe there is something about the opportunities that come up will ask you to sacrifice other things, and kind of that tax paying towards the 10th, that tax paying towards the career house, or the legacy that you want to leave. You have to sacrifice other things in order to kind of feed into that. And but just you talking, the Olympics are happening right now, as we talk in July. And so I just anecdotally wonder, when Mars transits your first, if you are more inclined to just run or
Oh
to be
gosh,
competitive,
yeah. And did you hear about
know?
the Australian athlete who cut off his finger because he couldn't wait for it to heal, because he wanted to compete, and he would have had to miss competing because while he waited for his finger to heal, so he cut it off.
Oh my gosh. Well, there you go. There is a
Yeah,
very extreme example of that. Maybe
yeah.
you don't need to do that.
No, no, don't do that. That's not what we're
Yeah.
suggesting, but that is this Mars Jupiter conjunction squaring Saturn.
Yeah.
That
When I
is,
think of the tarot cards, the tarot usually represents Mars as the tower,
mm,
and the Wheel of Fortune is Jupiter. And so the Wheel of Fortune is like things ride up, they ride down, they ride up, they ride down. There's all the influence there. And Mars, the tower, requires that destruction in order for new things to kind of come out of it. And so as you're riding around the wheel of life, you know, there are going to be times where you have to like let things kind of crumble down. And I see that the opportunity with that square with Saturn is that it will probably feel difficult, especially for people that are either in a Mars or Saturn ruled perfection year, or have those as your time lord or as your chart ruler, or if you're mutable rising, you know, if it's hitting your chart specifically, if you have this 17-degree of mutables in your chart, you might feel this. You might feel it from a square or opposition or conjunction in your own nativity, but that it's onward, you know, get through this so that you can continue to go onward without having to chop your finger off. I don't think that no one else needs to do that. We have the story already to talk about. No one else needs to replicate it.
we don't suggest that. It's
No.
very, I mean, that's why it's made like this, obviously, because it's so
Yeah.
extreme. You know, wait for the next Olympics. There's always going to
Sure. Yeah. Your finger will not grow back.
be. No.
So then we have, so what was the day? That was the 16th.
Mhm.
And so now we have the 18th. So 2 days later, we have Uranus square Mercury. So this date we talked about in week 1 as kind of a date to kind of look forward, because in July 21st, we had a political candidate here in the United States declare that they were not going to run for re-election. And so now we have the same transit happening because Mercury is retrograde back into Leo and squaring that Uranus again. It's a date maybe to look for some sort of disruption or communication of a shift in theme. I'm looking particularly at the United States politics for this date, just to kind of see if something kind of comes back up, because this is the same transit. This time Mercury is retrograde instead of forward as it was in July. But outside of US politics, we're having this second aspect made between these two planets. And as Sonia said before, Uranus is like those lightning bolt, those ideas, those flashes of inspiration that come through. And retrograde Mercury is an idea that you forgot you had, is an idea that you kind of put away, but now you're revisiting it of like, you know what, I really do want to actually try that. You know, Mercury is about to Cazimi the sun in very soon. I think that might be our next chart that we look at. But you know, what is the tension point between the Leo and Taurus houses, particularly with thoughts, communication, and ways of expression and authenticity and being true and those sort of themes. The rest of the chart, you know, there's plenty of things going on, but these two do get my attention, mostly because it will be quick, and we've already had this once a month ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a lot, isn't it? I mean, they met in Taurus at 13 degrees for their conjunction. For some reason, I haven't got the actual date, but we did speak about that. It would have been April, May time, wouldn't it? Oh, back in Taurus at 13. Oh, no, it would have been
It
longer.
would have been 13, yeah, because Uranus has been,
Yeah,
Uranus was in, the conjunction with Jupiter and Uranus was 2149. So it would have been around the 22nd degree, probably in Taurus.
That's probably why I didn't write the date down. I probably thought that doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
Went off and got distracted and didn't come back. So yeah, we're back to Uranus being in that prayer decan of like, let's see what happens. But I made a note of like, what are we reviewing here about the mental processes that we value, about the authenticity
Yeah.
We fight for what insights and breakthroughs will come, what sudden twists in our thoughts, social media, and central figures backtracking. That the archetype is like originality and inventiveness, verbal play as well. So you might see political figures vying for the attention in social media, but like with a playfulness would win the day. Like those play on words that you see. So
Yeah.
one party might post something and another party might take it and just make it clever somehow and
Yeah.
twist it and create something from it. Those intellectual breakthroughs, but it can also be overstimulation, like a erratic thinking and a lack of focus when there's too much, like decision paralysis that I've found a lot recently.
Well, and I really like this for Aries risings, you know, looking at Uranus there in the second house of like this brilliant side of idea of like, how can I develop a new skill? And maybe it's a return of a skill that I once had, because Mercury and the Sun would be in the fifth if it was Aries rising, Uranus in the second. And so tying in like the creative imagination and inspiration of the fifth house, feeding into the skills and resources, and hopefully then earning income off of that with the Uranus in the second. I just think this might be a fun transit for Aries. And then also the moon is getting closer to becoming full. It'll be full the next day. And so the moon over there in the 11th house, kind of tying in, the moon exalts in Taurus, which would be the second house of Aries rising. So is this going to be like some sort of brilliant idea that you have on a Sunday, Aries rising, that if you have this kind of like wild hair scheme, just play with it and see what comes of it. You never know what will become viral. This has like a viral idea for especially Aries risings, which I think is great.
Oh, that's so exciting. I wondered if I've spotted another contractissue that's wide again. I know I pointed one out that wasn't. Are Uranus and Pluto? No, they're not. Well, 27 and 0.
Yeah, so the contra antitia goes over the equinox point, or yeah, the equinox point. So Aries and Pisces share contra antitia, and then Taurus and Aquarius do. Pluto would need to be 3. So the moon will have contra antitia with Uranus, but Pluto would need to be 3 to be able to share that light. Yeah, I don't see any others.
No.
But there might be, I like the idea of the moon kind of like giving a little wink to Uranus when it's at 3 degree. It would be pretty, just for like an hour or so, a couple hours maybe, when it's in Aquarius. But yeah, Aquarius and Taurus do have contra antitia with each other.
Just bringing in that outsider rebel energy just to stir things up even more.
Yep.
Because August isn't busy enough already.
No, I mean, because then the next day, early in the hours, we have Mercury having squared that Uranus is now Cazimi the sun. So it's kind of moving back through the sun. And yeah, we have it there in Leo at 26 degrees.
Yeah. And that's like, so it gave me chills when you said that about Biden. And then I went and checked the chart for the 21st, and that was the 26 degree as well.
Let's go back. I'm going to go back really. I think it's to, yeah. So this one here on the 21st of July, 2622 was Mercury, and 2632 was Uranus. So that was the chart of the moment for when Biden withdrew. And then we go forward. I forget which one I was at
the Cazimi, Mercury.
The
Cazimi.
next one at Cazimi. So now the Cazimi is at that 2635. So that's very, very, very close.
Yeah. So, and it just seems significant with Leo being the solar figures in society. It's like, is a new solar figure being crowned?
Yeah.
And then we look at the date. And what did you find out about the date?
I found out that the Democratic National Convention is beginning on this day, which, you know, Biden, is a Democrat. He's the one that stepped aside, decided to not run. It was also a full moon in Capricorn that same day at the 21st. So I feel like that fullness, that completion, full moon in Capricorn and Saturn sign, kind of adds that legacy and that age and that length of time to it. This one here, it's also an approaching full moon later the day, also in Saturn sign, but in Aquarius, which is an air sign. It's not the earth sign of Saturn. And so it's continuing that's what fixed signs do, right? They continue or sustain the light brought to us by the cardinal light, by the cardinal signs. So the shift from that cardinal Capricorn Saturn sign into the fixed sustained Saturn of Aquarius, growing in light at the moment of the Cazimi, the same day of the Democratic National Convention, when we have a new candidate, which was Biden's vice president, Kamala Harris, being essentially crowned with the nomination from the Democratic Party. So I just feel like that ties in. Now, it also might speak to other things. Not everybody is Kamala Harris. This is not just the astrology for her, but it was significant to kind of get my attention at that moment. You know, there's a thing called geocaching, where you put in like latitude and longitude of certain places, and you kind of do this puzzle to kind of find where in the woods or along a trail where there's a little geocache spot. And that's what these degree points remind me of, is like, there was a geocache, there was a spot in the woods at that 26-degree Leo in the Leo forest that Mercury left a note and had an exchange once, and then he kind of retraced his steps, and he's going back to that 26-degree point and rereading his note and maybe changing it a little bit. It's like these little tiny touch points that the stars make. And especially if you have a 26-degree Leo or close to that in your own chart, like this might also speak very directly to you. When it happens within those degrees, it can be very personal, similar to the Mars Jupiter conjunction. If you have, you know, any placements of Gemini around 17, 18 degrees, you're probably going to feel that more personally than someone else that doesn't have any Gemini placements, you know. So it's, we pay attention to the numbers because as astrologers, we are primed to see patterns. And we always like when Mercury winks at us.
So nice. And with a Cazimi, for us personally and individually, we can maybe expect insights or revelations. They may come through at the time of the Cazimi, they may come through after, or when Mercury goes direct. I mean, I went to an ISAR lecture on retrogrades, and a lady was telling a story about a lost pendant that was given to her by her mum, and she fully expected it to return when Mercury went direct, and it actually didn't return until the following Mercury retrograde. So she had to wait the month. So she said, you can't actually really predict when, but by George, it appeared at the time she had a chart for when it was lost, and she'd do another chart when she found it. She actually found it for sale on Etsy. She'd lost it in the street, it turned out, you know, of all the ways she'd had multiple horror-y people do charts for it and everything. But it turned out somebody had found it in the street, listed it on Etsy, and she had been checking it, but she'd started like checking it only once a month or whatever. And she did find it listed. And she started thinking she was just going to have to buy one that looked like it. And when it was delivered, and she showed it to her husband, he was like, that's the exact one. You know, she knew the scratches and everything on it, but it was the exact one. But she said it can even show up like that, where it comes in the next retrograde.
Well, and even to find it in the merchant world is very Mercury retrograde.
Yes. Isn't it just, you know, that person who found it and then sold it and made some money?
Yeah.
Okay.
It changed hands, it changed exchange currency. It kind of put some like little flow into the currency of Mercury. I love that.
Yeah. It was really beautiful. It was onyx on one side and mother and pearl on the other. It was a really beautiful vintage piece.
Yeah.
So yeah, no wonder she made a lot of effort to find it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was white and black.
Just
like
you could like turn it
two-sided.
Yeah, so you could have it
all these Hermes coded things. I love that.
Yeah, it's such an article. But yeah, you know, tune into your dreams around that time. Just come through, light a candle to Hermes if you're so inclined, you know, on that day.
Yeah, so this is at 3 in.the.morning on Monday for England, and then at 7 in.the.morning we still have that Cazimi. You know, it's Mercury has moved through, but then we have quite a big moment. So we have Jupiter up here at 17 degrees, squaring Saturn and squaring Venus, who are now in opposition to each other, because that's what happens when you have three mutables at 17 degrees and different mutable signs. So
that's another
where
number.
do we start with this one?
Well, the conjunction started on the 23rd of May, and that was at 29 degrees. so again, it's hard when all these conjunctions happened around the same time, and now because Venus, Mercury, and the Sun aren't that dissimilar in how they travel. The Sun is a very consistent speed. Mercury and Venus run ahead a bit and then pull back. But overall, the three of them travel very much the same speed. So that's why we had all the conjunctions around the same time. And now we're having the opening squares around the same time as well, which is interesting.
What's your general sense of Venus in Virgo opposing Saturn and Pisces? So Saturn is in the house or in the sign that Venus exalts, and Venus is fallen because of that. She's in the opposing sign. So there's that inventiveness, that resourcefulness. I get the sense that Venus might begin to feel a little fatigued, but I see that she's in Jupiter's bound. And so that's helpful. And mostly because, you know, Jupiter is kind of giving her the tools to use to deal with the situation. Jupiter rules Pisces traditionally. Saturn is still there, and Mercury's bound, which is ruled by Virgo. So there's like, it's like mutually assured destruction. So like, what can we do to kind of maintain the peace? I don't dislike Saturn opposing Venus. You know, it's the nature of Saturn to oppose. So it's like his favorite way to talk to you is from as far away as possible. and have a curious mercurial Venus there, fully away from the sun. So we should be able to see her in the night sky at this point. But squaring Jupiter, squaring the other benefic by degree.
I mean, I've got the archetypes for Venus and Saturn I was looking at. I mean, for literature buffs, Jane Eyre, if you don't know the story, it's Mr. Rochester, who's a very Saturnian character. And Jane doesn't know his feelings, and then the house ends up burning down and he goes blind, and then they find true love. You know, then he declares his feelings. Then, you know, not when he's, you know, fully able, and finally they can marry, because the obstruction to their marriage, which was a wife who'd gone mad and was in the attic, and it was all these hidden secrets, but everything came out in this story. So it's a very detailed love story, really, but a very kind of tragic one as well. And she doesn't know the full story all the way through. But also you could look at like Romeo and Juliet. People know that as well. Like you say, at the distance, you've got the balcony is very much the scene most people are aware of, like that Romeo declaring his love, but from the bottom up and looking up at this woman that he's got on this pedestal. But again, it's love that's forbidden against the families. So that's the tension there of these relationships that have some kind of obstacle to overcome.
I love the idea of rereading Jane Eyre for this transit.
Yeah,
when are you ever invited to do that? I think that Sonia's advice to reread Jane Eyre for August is a beautiful suggestion.
That one came to me. Romeo and Juliet was given, but I was like, no, there's another character, and it was like, yes, so Jane Eyre.
Yeah.
Everything that she went through. But yeah, it can be pleasant relationships and quality time, because Saturn can crystallize things as well. It's like the pressure. Like if you think pressure can create diamonds, so if your relationship is good, that pressure from Saturn can crystallize it and bring out the best in it as well. So it's not all like Jane Eyre and Mr. Rochester. That pressure they were under actually brought out the best in both of them. And they had a really good relationship by the end of the book, but you'd have never thought it.
You have to get through the whole book.
Yeah.
Because later we also know
that it is an old book.
Yes. but also, I mean, we look now at, this is later that same day. We still have that opposition, and we still have the squares between the benefics. But the moon now is fully full in Saturn's sign. So it's kind of tying in. Aquarius and Pisces don't see each other through traditional sight. So the moon isn't necessarily witnessing either, you know, Venus or Saturn, but it can see by trine the Jupiter and still Mars conjunction over here with the other air. But the joke of this Saturnine sign fully illuminating all of the sky at this point of like, let's look at all the light, let's look at everything that's going on, because there's a lot going on at once. So we've kind of set the stage of a lot of these. I mean, we have Mercury retrograde. It's just gone through an inferior conjunction with the sun. It will station in about 5 degrees before it goes forward again. We have Jupiter Mars conjunct, still within 2 degrees over there in Mercury sign. We have the opposition between a fallen Venus and a retrograde Saturn. But now the moon's kind of like, I want to join the party. You know, the sun is squaring Uranus. Mercury is kind of out of that right now. But I mean, like all of this, the moon and the sun engaging with that Uranus there, with everything else going on. It's like it's almost like the light, there's a party going on, and like one light at a time is being flicked on, and the full moon is this final overhead light just showing the entire scene. Maybe it'll help tie in together of like how all these things are actually functioning at the same time. How are we dealing with all of this all at once? It's like that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once. That's what this movie is.
I've literally written that down as well.
Yeah.
Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah.
Because it's that thing, it's like a couple of hours and then this, and a couple of hours and then that. And these are all quite big conjunctions and events and squares that we
all on their own.
Yeah, but we'd usually have a full day, a few days at least between them, and then suddenly, like one day, 2 days within each other, boom, 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 they're happening within hours.
Yeah,
and it is a lot, you know. So we could expect in the mundane collective world that the news, the 24-hour news, will be like breaking news, those kind of days of things happening. And spotting the archetypes might be quite difficult because of separating.
There's so many.
Yeah, like when you get a stellium, it's hard to see each planet.
Yeah,
like when you've got all of this. But yeah, we've got this beautiful owl, and I try and just focus on, okay, what does the owl want? And owls are meant to fly and they like to be up high, but we've got this owl here down on its rock, and it's packed its bag, it's ready to fly, but we've got the name of the decan as Tangled Thoughts. And it's really about how our thoughts can ground us or bring us into that moment of fear just before we take off, because Aquarius is the sign of thoughts. So it's like, okay, you've got those thoughts, but don't let them stop you. You're meant to fly, you're meant to soar. You know, be the owl, be the wise owl. You know where you're going, you know what you're meant to do with this. Aquarius is the sign of the outsider, the rebel. That path that you're on and what this moon is illuminating for you is where you're meant to be going. But these thoughts, and we've got the keyword there, the tangled thoughts, the analysis into the unknown, karmic entanglement and liberation. So there is something karmic here, and there are bonds, and they are important and to be respected, but you are meant to be liberated from them as well. That they're there as your foundation, as the rock that you land on, and that you pack, and maybe you leave home and return, you know, but still fly and soar and have that as your base. I would say is like the overarching message here.
Yeah, and there's something similar about the tension point between Venus and Saturn, and then the sun and the moon. You know, at a full moon, we look at, okay, the sun is at home in Leo. And if we think of just like the yang external energy of the sun being constant and not changing face and having steady speed, and then the power of what is, you know, a Leo sun, it's archetypally that solar figure, leaders of a singular entity. And then we look at the power held within Aquarius is usually collective power of a power that has been like, it's like literally the power of the people. And so the power of the people shining the light from the power of a singular source, it just illuminates how much collective power we have. Whenever there's a full moon in Aquarius, that's what it feels like. It's like, yes, we're shining light from one single source, but when we share power, we realize just how grand we are when we gather together. And there's that tension between the two, which is not necessarily you know, discordant. It can be harmonious, as well as Venus you know, as like singular, if we just want to do the binary of gender as women and Saturn as men, of having that kind of tension point, and realizing the dance that the yang and the yin energy have, or the receptive and the external energies have. I just like that they're both happening kind of at the same time within the same day, to just reflect that tensions, like if there's a tension point, if there's a weakness in that tension point, that's kind of where you get to dig deep and discover why is this tense? Where do I find the most vulnerability within these areas of life? Like within the Virgo Pisces areas of life, you know, where is that tension being drawn towards? Was your attention to the tension being drawn? And then also the Aquarius and Leo tension, where is your energy being drawn with that? What sort of power dynamics are happening in both of those axes? So that hits the fixed and it hits the mutable. And then we, of course, you know, not to leave the cardinal out, we still have the nodes transiting through Aries and Libra. You know, they're plugging away, and they're going to move pretty soon. So everyone is involved here. You know, everybody has a Leo and Aquarius house. Everybody has a Venus and Pisces house, whether you have planets there or not. 2/3 of us that have either a fixed or mutable rising are going to be hit at our major angles. So this will be collectively experienced, and maybe that's what the moon is there reflecting, is like, we're all in this together. So how do we how do we go forward with as much fortitude, which is a very Saturnine thing, and transparency, which is a full moon thing, but also it's just the compassion with that Saturn and Pisces, and that Venus and Virgo, passion of service to ourselves and to others. I just like those two axes kind of happening at the same time with this full moon.
So true. While you were talking, it was making me think about like feminist movements and things like that rising up, and how much stronger they are when they recognize the masculine, like you say, the yin and the yang. But when they take men with them and on board, and rather than hating on men or whatever, it's so much stronger. And the same for the patriarchy, when they recognize the role of women within society and lift women up genuinely rather than token. How much stronger it can be, and when the two don't need to be separated out, what a better society we have. When each can just play to their strengths and gender just isn't seen. How much stronger.
Or highlighted. I mean, or conditional, like it's not a token, or it's not an obligation, but just recognizing whatever the needs are, having that compassion and that mutability. That's the best thing about mutability.
And it really brings that out, doesn't it? It's really leaning into that.
We have a couple more slides for this week, so let's go to, we have the Saturn square Jupiter. We've kind of already talked about that.
Can I just add to that we had the opening conjunction when they first met was the 21st of December 2020. So we can cast our minds back to what happened there for the collective. Now, we're not likely to see we might see the same themes come up, but for the collective, but also personally, what was happening personally for you then. And that might give you clues, because these are, of all the planets that we're talking about, although some of the squares and conjunctions have been hitting, we're talking now about two of the slower planets together. We're not talking about Venus as a faster planet meeting a slower planet. These are both quite slow planets. So they've been traveling together since 2020. It's now taken them 4 years to reach their first square. So this is, you know,
what's odd is today I had a memory come up of that same day, because I went and met my family halfway. They live about 5 hours away, so we each drove about 2.5 hours, and we had kind of like a family day. And I was like, that was the day of the conjunction. I remember that day very clearly, and it was just kind of brought to mind of like how much we have changed and how much we have stayed the same. That's a beautiful recognition of where we're at in comparison to, gosh, it was 4 years ago that there was that conjunction. That's amazing.
This is kind of like the longest that we're talking about today, isn't it, really?
This actually concludes this very, very busy week.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us for the weekly forecast. You often hear creators ask you, could you please like and subscribe? And I can't emphasize enough how important it is for small channels. It really does make the difference to allow us to continue to make free content for you, reach the audience that our content is made for. And we can do this with your help if you've enjoyed it. It gives us immediate feedback on what you're enjoying and what you would like more of. It doesn't cost you anything, and it's a great way for you to support our work and just let us know that you're enjoying what we're doing. So if you have enjoyed this content through to the end and you'd like us to keep making it and make more of it, that's a great way for you to let us know. So wherever you're watching this, please do give us a thumbs up and give us your support. And we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.